Hey guys. So today you and I are going to talk about managers. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, does it bother you when you have a new manager once in every few months in your team? Nope. No, it doesn't. The thing that bothers me with new managers or like new people is usually only when I have either an incompetent manager or a manager who has how do I put this, a presence that is not a net benefit to the team, if that makes sense. So an example would be that I've worked with a few teams now, like several managers and so forth, and so I have a fairly easy time getting to a point where the manager's impact is less than what you might expect. So you can't get it all the way to where you want it to be, but there are a few tips I can give you to sort of make the impact of having new people coming and going, especially at the manager level, to have that established fairly early on. And that is to understand the bare minimum that is required in order to establish a work framework. Why is this important? I'm glad you asked. You can think of it as a little bit as having a legal system. I like to refer to this as, because I am so ignorant when it comes to the law, because I know nothing about it. But one of the fundamental tenets about it I do understand, which is that it's an agreement between everybody who lives in a given society. This is how this situation, like how this law works. We have agreed, or this is basically the norm for how it's going to work. It's basically a declaration of a process or a response or some type of thing you're going to do even based on some given situation. And that is very, very powerful, because what happens is that is the official decided upon way of doing something. The times I find that people have an issue with switching managers and so forth is when they have a fairly unofficial sort of, we do it as we kind of play it by ear. It's sort of, sometimes we do this, sort of we do this type of way of working. Because what happens is that the craving for alignment and structure is not fulfilled. And every single team, I don't care which one it is, needs some guidelines for things. Because you see, the thing is, it doesn't have to be written down for it to be there. A simple thing, just an obvious thing such as, how do you do a pull request? That's an unofficial, even if it's a startup, if it's like just two people working, they have to align somehow, because they need to coordinate, and that is exactly the way that the law works. You decide together how it should work, and then you follow that rule. And the thing that I do is that I establish those basic rules. Those I like to think about it as a fence around the work process of the team. And when you have gotten the team to sort of align, and I try to write it down as well, because that makes it feel more official to people. It's easier to remember as well. When that is established, the manager will respect that, usually, unless it's really, really not, if it's not working. This is why I try to stay out of getting too far with it. Like because if you go too far into the process swamp, you're going to end up doing things and they're going to undo it, or like challenge it and change it anyway, which can happen, of course, and so forth. But if you can find a good sweet spot for something that this actually works really well, it's not too much, it's not nothing, that usually means that there is a framework of working, and there is a decided upon way of doing things, which means that you can change managers like that. It does not matter, because as soon as they get in, the initial problem that you have with a new person goes away, which is that period of uncertainty. Because every new person, it doesn't matter if it's a manager or someone else, has a period of uncertainty where they're either going to try to prove themselves or they're going to try to somehow orient themselves in this new environment. How do I fit in? What role do I play? Who are the people around me? Like all of this sort of stuff. All that uncertainty becomes drastically reduced when you have an onboarding process or some agreed upon set of rules of how everything works. That gives them answers to a lot of those initial questions very early on, and they usually just, because that is the inclination for every single person, doesn't matter if it's a manager or just some random person. If you enter a room or a group of friends or a social setting, a new job, whatever, your first instinct almost always as a human is to adapt to the environment. Which means that if the environment is not defined, if it's completely like just ad hoc, you're sort of swimming in uncertainty for this very long period of time. As a manager, you basically either do like your ultimate goal is to help the process along. So when you're in a position of authority, if there are no rules for anything, you will start making up your own rules. And so the question now, and this is usually the thing that affects this team, if you have a lot of managers coming and going, they will start something, then be removed, and then you have this weird process nobody feels ownership over, and that goes away. Like it becomes an orphan process. You have this thing that you used to do, you don't do it any longer because it's not the team who owns the process, it was that manager. And then the next guy comes in, or girl or whatever, and like they do the same thing, and then they get banned at that, you get abandoned again. So you sort of get into this almost groove of that, oh yeah, there's going to be a new manager, they're going to like make these changes, but yeah, we have all this shit nobody cares about from all these other guys and girls who came through the door. So you sort of become apathetic because the team is not aligning on how things should work. That's the thing that I do. That's the thing I do first and foremost whenever I start in a team. I set up a work process that feels comfortable for the people who are there, not the people who come and go all the time. Because when you do that, the manager usually makes very little in terms of meaningful change. Even if they get switched out, you have this basic work framework that just sticks around. Because if they actually want to make a change, they can. But the key thing has happened, and that is that the team will continue working and having something that feels organized and structured and well working, even without the manager there. So it doesn't matter if you switch them out. So what I want you to take away from this is that it doesn't bother me much if I have new managers or like when people get switched out or so forth all that much, because I usually take the time to define the laws or like the rules of the team or the processes fairly early on. And I don't do that with just me, I do that with the team. The reason why I do that is because, as I said, whenever a person starts in a new environment, their first priority is to understand how it works. And so if you take the time to define the things that matter to the team, the things that they want to be working, and sort of just go through it, write it down. It doesn't actually take that much time especially if you've done it a few times. And define it so everybody has a fairly clear and shared understanding of it, and then because it creates ownership. You own this thing as the entire team. It's not one person who maintains it. You've seen that 100 times. A manager, for example, who facilitates some random meeting, and if that person is not there for the meeting, like a stand-up, for example, when you know that a team doesn't give two shits about process when the stand-up does not happen if the manager isn't there, which I see all the time. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. You have not established shared ownership of any process. So every time you change a manager, you will have some new person trying to figure out, oh, how does all of this work? And like, how does all of this work? Like this confusion, because things are not defined, is the thing that usually bothers people. And as I said, if you just take the time to document all the basics about how a new person gets to sort of be productive and understand all the parts that make up your environment, and you agree upon a basic set of work rules, how the daily stuff works, 99% of the issues with having a new person goes away. It's actually gone to the point where I can fairly with confidence say that you could hire or fire anybody from most of my teams, every single, just as much as you want. It does not matter, because the way, like the environment and how everything works and where everything is actually defined to a point where you get a new person into the groove with them in a manner of hours for like just setting things up and for understanding the greater context. it's a fairly streamlined process. So the worst hit to your team is that, yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer for this person to deliver on new value or things like that. And when something is defined well enough, or not too much, not to that you have that sweet spot of how to do everything, it means that as many, like, it doesn't really matter if you have a new manager every other week, because they're basically not going to do anything, because they're going to see that this thing is sort of working, and they might have a lot of strong opinions here and there in some situations, because I mean, it's never going to be perfect. I've had many managers who loved the fact that, like, they made no changes whatsoever to any of the processes or anything, because the team was working effectively. Everybody was sort of happy, so they didn't feel a need to mess things around, right? But they started like randomly hiring people, or like wasting time in other ways, or so forth and so forth, which, you know, can be annoying. But at the very least, this little thing will reduce the amount of issues that you have from having people coming and going over and over and over. That much I can basically promise you. Have a great day.